Today I'm going on a hunt in St. Louis to solve a mystery. I want to find the St. Louis wheel. And no, not this wheel. I'm looking for this one. This is the original Ferris wheel. And I do mean original. This was the first Ferris wheel ever created. Well, where is it now? This is an unsolved St. Louis mystery. And it's pretty common to hear the folklore about the wheel being buried somewhere in Forest Park. Let me give you some background about the wheel and some possible locations it could be in. The wheel was named after George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. It was originally created for the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, but then it was moved to St. Louis for the 1904 World's Fair. And it was the shining star of the World's Fair. Compared to today's wheel at Union Station, which sits at 200 feet tall, the original wheel was much taller at 264 feet. Not only was it taller, but inside today's wheel, you can squeeze in about 8 people. The inside is about as wide as I am tall, but the original wheel was monstrously big. It was about the size of a bus that could fit up to 60 people. Not only was it popular for seeing the sights of the city during the fair, but people would also use it for extravagant dinner parties and would reserve entire Ferris wheel carts just for a band to play music. But I think the coolest thing you could do on the Ferris wheel was get married. People would host all their wedding guests on a single gondola, and they would be wed at the peak of the Ferris wheel ride. One person rode onto the wheel on their horse, and they stayed mounted on top of their horse for the whole ride while they got married. Around 50 couples in total were married on top of the wheel. After the World's Fair ended, Coney Island wanted to buy the wheel, but it was too expensive to move there. So they blew up the wheel with dynamite and sold all the scrap metal, except for the 70-ton axle made of steel. In 1906 at the time, they didn't have the capabilities to cut it up and sell it for scrap. When the axle was created, it was the single largest forged piece of steel ever created in America. Now here's where the wheel is solidified in St. Louis folklore. Fast forward to 1943, and the U.S. was asking the public to donate their scrap metal to help out with the effort in World War II. A man named William Jones said he was on the team that helped demolish the wheel, and he said it was too heavy to move, so they just buried it where it lay. He claims it was buried in the fairway of the 8th hole in the golf course on Forest Park. That would either be this one or this one, but I think it's likely this one. But when the city came out to dig, they detected metal in the 9th hole fairway and decided to dig there instead. So either here or here. As they were digging though, they turned up nothing. In the days where the city was digging, many crowds would gather and watch, and many people in those crowds claimed they knew the correct spot where it was buried. One person claimed it was 100 yards south of the dig site, around here. Another person claimed it was 300 yards northeast, around here. A separate man on the demolition team claimed it was first cut up and then brought back to Chicago a few days after the demolition. But his claim that a blowtorch from 1904 was able to cut it up, very unlikely. The news cycle at the time in St. Louis had everybody trying to figure out where the wheel was buried. In 1999, the folklore was revisited when Channel 30 claimed that they found the wheel with radar around here by the intersection of Wydown and Skinker. But when they started digging, all they found was an old sewer pipe. In 2007, a man named Dr. Sheldon Breener used specialized equipment to conduct magnetic surveys in these 5 areas where he thought the axle could be. He found metallic anomalies all around these areas, most of which was probably tiny parts of scrap and bolts from the wheel. But he came to the conclusion that the axle was placed here at the intersection of Wydown and Skinker Boulevard. This was near the spot Channel 30 dug up. No digging was performed at this spot though, and Dr. Breener passed away in 2019. There are also many claims and accounts that people used horses and mules to drag the axle further west of Forest Park, which means it can be buried in any of these areas up to and around Wydown Middle School. An expansion project at Wydown School in the 80s led to the discovery of a large metallic object roughly the size of the axle, and they couldn't move it with a bulldozer. So they just moved the building a few more feet away and just continued with the project. They reburied the object without further looking into if it was the axle. The World's Fair Appreciation Society actually claims that the axle was brought back to Chicago after the fair, and when the technology improved over a decade later, in 1919, they then cut it up and sold it for scrap. And while this very well could be true, the value of the scrap from the axle in 1904 was probably not worth the squeeze for the expensive cost to move it to Chicago. This Reddit user claims they knew somebody who found the axle during Forest Park renovations in 2004, but they reburied it as to not mess up the construction schedule, and because there was a lot of money riding on the renovation. They said it's under the lake, so maybe over here? We may never know what the true fate of the Ferris wheel was. I personally believe it's still here, probably buried under the road at Wydown and Skinker, but we may never get any more opportunities to dig up roads or dig up golf courses, and certainly not dig under people's houses and schools. The location of the original Ferris wheel remains a mystery, but the St. Louis folklore still acts as a fun activity for those who are hunting it. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. Let me know in the comments where you think it could be. What have you heard? And check back into my page for more St. Louis content.